New set, new preliminary deck list video, and boy do I have a doozy for you today. If you are new to this style of video, pretty much ahead of the new sets, I'm put together a bunch of the deck lists that I plan on testing and upgrading from the decks that I own, and just get to share to you all to give you all either a starting point or a point of comparison as you're building your own decks. So the reason I say this is a doozy though is because we got these new generic cards here that, if you have no G-Zone, can act as a top 7 search for a grade 3 with a different card name than your Vanguard, or as additional shield, and even bigger shield if you're up against a deck with a G-Zone. So because of that, mainly for that first skill, for that extra consistency, there's a few decks that I thought that'd be interesting, and so I decided to throw them in here. Now, since there's so many decks, if there's a specific deck you want to see, you can find which decks and the timestamps listed in the cards down the description below or along the little scroll bar. They usually have that pop-up you can press. So I definitely recommend going down there to move around as you need to. But if you're just here along for the ride, then let's get right into it. So I plan to structure this video is going nation by nation. And then within the nation, I'm going to prioritize starting with the decks that receive triple rare support, other than the generic, like dedicated triple rare support, followed up by the decks that received minimal support in just a dedicated double rare, and then finish off the decks that didn't receive any dedicated support, but I think were enhanced by, or want to test if they are enhanced by these new generic cards. So starting off, we've got Varga, Rakshasa, Unparalleled, Dracoslav, Varga, Dragres, Rakshasa. So this version of Varga is a strict upgrade by all accounts. So now you do have to wait till turn 4 to get into it. It does not function if you run it in your ride deck. You can, but you don't get off any of its effects. So we still run the OG Varga, but hey, that just means we run an extra copy of Persona Ride in the deck, making it just a little more consistent. But the reason I say this is just a strict upgrade is because now, on top of doing everything that Varga did, it also retires your opponent's back row at the end of its first attack, and its divine skill no longer checks your opponent's damage zone to see if they have 4 more cards. You can just fire it if it's already restood this turn, which is quite strong. Your opponent really loses an avenue to try to counterplay Varga with this form. Another support card that came out was the Storm Slasher Dragon that was retired from Rearguard Circle by the ability of your grade 3 or greater Vanguard Varga's card name. You can call it to your back row as rest. So since we're now nuking the entire board, having the ability to maintain some bodies on board so you don't have to commit as much from hand next turn is very much appreciated. And then on top of that, once you're on Rakshasa, you can pay a Soul Blast to stand it, meaning that you can restand it as a booster to make your subsequent attacks even bigger. And it's actually a 13k booster because when your Vanguard's in the Malworm state, it just gets 5k in general, which, well, when you ride Rakshasa, you're going to be in the Malworm state. From there, this deck kind of functions exactly how it always has been, just better. You still got our Ashuras to get extra attacks and help us maintain pieces in hand by looping them back when they are retired. We've got our dedicated core of cards that can tag themselves out to draw a card before the retire happens. This is obviously great because now we're not going minus, and instead we're just digging for even more pieces. And then to round it off, we also have some pieces that help us build a board, such as the Twin Pulsive, being able to thin out our deck, build a board. Fall Heart is also here to do that with its second skill, but its first skill is also very handy to just draw more cards when guarding or discarding for ride deck. Gallnet also kind of same parallel, good shield, but also can draw a card when placed on board. And then of course we're running the one Silent Flare Dragon to help find our well, I should say, it does help us find either Rakshasa or Twin Pulsive or our Radiance Caliburn, but the reason I'm only running at 1 copy is because this deck is a bit tight on soul. We Soul Blast 1 for the Virgilla ride line, and then we call out the Boulder Axe without replacing it, so we only end up with 1 soul MVC. We've got Impalehorn Dragon with Soul Blast and Storm Slash Dragon, which Soul Blasts. And if we fire this card on our first grade 3 turn, we should have 1 card Soul Blasted from Virgilla's effect, but the other one's still in Soul, and we got a Boulder Axe on board that also we don't have access to, so we end up having to essentially Soul Blast 1 for this effect. So it's sort of a Hail Mary if we still haven't found our Rakshasa to try to guarantee that we find it. But past that, it's also a consistency card to find a Twin Pulsive, with the idea being that if we want to build a board, ideally we want a card that can tag out for 2 cards, so we can use Summit Flare Dragon to be able to try to find it, and worst case scenario, we just loop it back to hand and can call it to board or keep it as a shield. So that's pretty much Varga. It's just got better than what his previous versions were, and I'm super excited to test it out to see how it feels. Next up, we've got Aelquilibra, which if you saw my deck breakdown video, I forget exactly what I called it, deck showcase, that's what I called it. If you saw the deck showcase, I did mention that its new support card here, the Drag Ritter Badia, was kind of patched up the major weakness of this deck in that it's very subject to variance because its form of advantage is draw, meaning you're just kind of subject to the variance of just random draws. But this card is phenomenal because it's a top 7 search on place from hand to be able to find an overcharge or your order card to equalize the scales of the world. And then since it doesn't cost anything, you do have to put a card from hand into soul or discard it, but that's perfectly fine because it's not really like you're generating a soul potentially with that, and that's really the best use case of this card to be able to build a soul for the Aelquilibra. But it's also quite flexible since to equalize the scales of the world lets us call overcharge units from drop. You can always just discard one with the intention of bringing it back, so you're really not losing out a card on hand here. It just kind of helps fuel all your other effects. And then the ability when it's overcharged to just gain additional 10k just fits right in with this deck. Means just a big beater. You're not even sacrificing power to get that consistency, which is phenomenal. So pretty much this deck, if you watch that video, highly would recommend going to see it. You'll see it linked up in the card above, but it functions exactly the same way that deck does, just with the difference of throwing in this support card, and I think it's just going to be a phenomenal fit for the deck because also it's a grade 2, and it gets its effect off on grade 2 because it's just one place from hand. No, doesn't check your Vanguard at all, meaning you can use it as a more aggressive tool as well. So there, from the deck list I showed off in the deck showcase, I cut the Pantrek Dragon because I was running it mainly because I wanted more overcharge units. But in terms of being an overcharge unit that helps you dig for your pieces, this card just does what it does better and can come down a turn sooner. So I cut the 2 copies of that, and I also cut the Ford and Revertus. That card was there because it was a good card, but it was kind of the last pick of the deck to round it out. And this card, again, I think does what Ford and Revertus does, but a bit better, and also saves Counterblast to be able to focus on our other pieces such as our Eodil, our Order, and our Vanguard. And the Fall Heart here. And then I was just able to round out with the new Regalis piece, which wasn't out at the time that Aelquilibra was built for set 4. Would have run it otherwise. And then an extra Fall Heart because we cut the Panstrike Dragon. We should have access to more energy to be able to use, as well as more counterblast since we cut the Ford and Revertus. So this card just made sense to bump up. The whole reason I wasn't running it at higher copies in set 4 was just because of I wanted the Panstrike Dragon for it being an overcharge unit. So made sense to bump this one up. But yeah, other than that, just a solid upgrade that addressed the major weakness of this deck, and we'll see if it makes it any better. From Japanese results, doesn't look like it's been the most popular, but in terms of like just bumping it up, like, as a player, that's still exciting to see that your deck got something significant, even if it doesn't necessarily break the meta stand because of other decks. Moving over to Dark States, we've got the brand new ride line coming out of the set of Liael Odium. So this is a really cool deck that revolves around getting the Distorted Bane. Is that Destined Time Beast, excuse me. The Destined Timepiece token set order, and then setting up Regress Gauge in it to get various effects. So it's mainly centered around the Destined Time, Liael Odium, really cool, especially in juxtaposition to the Faded One of Time, Liael Immorta. So this one centers around another order card called Distorted Bane. So for each Distorted Bane Regress Gauge, your front row rear guards get power plus 5,000, so they can get pretty big since they can get up to 20k since you can run 4 copies. And then when she attacks, you can Soul Blast 1 and put a rear guard or card from hand as a Regress Gauge to give it triple drive. So it's swinging in with triple drive, meaning you've got even more chances to be able to check triggers. And then really what you're building up to is this divine skill here, because once you have 5 or more Regress Gauge, you can discard 2 cards to get an additional turn. It gets drive -1, and you have to skip a ride in main phase of that additional turn. So this is really just a fancy way to restand all your rear guards and get a chance to trigger some effects again, to swing in again for 6 swings total. And of course, Vanguard's 5 drive checks as well, which is very, very powerful. And a key part of this card is just being able to time it. So the rest of the deck is just kind of centered around, 1, finding these Distorted Banes, because they're pretty good. Obviously, Vanguard wants to see them in the order zone. But when played, if you have a Liael, you can Soul Charge 1 and put his face up as a Regress Gauge. So it doesn't really do much, and that effect isn't the most important. It's that second effect that when it's put in as a Regress Gauge, you draw a card and your Vanguard gets 10k until end of turn. So because this isn't the main order effect, this triggers if other stuff put in the Regress Gauge, which is typically better, but also means you can just kind of stack these up a bit quicker. So such as the Life Cessation Colossus. Cessation? Yeah. Anyway, lets you put a card from your hand face up as a Regress Gauge, draw 2. If you put the Distorted Bane, you're drawing 3. And then if you discard it, you've got stuff like the Nacris Colossus, which can put it as a Regress Gauge. And I think those are the main 2 ways. Yeah, those are the main 2 ways. Oh, and of course, Liael Odium's effect as well. So you can kind of build these up very quickly, and that's kind of the goal. So now, what are we doing with that? Because of course, extra turn, that's pretty good. Triple drive's pretty good, but what else is the deck doing? Decks typically do more than just this. Well, the Anachorus Colossus is a great utility tool here, as if it's a regress gauge, you can Counterblast 1 to call itself out while also paying time to drop regress gauge, which I already covered. So this just helps us generate bodies on board. It also means we can do stuff such as attack with it, bind it with Liael Odium, Divine Skill, call it out on your extra turn, and still maintain all those cards on board. And then also just kind of gives you a little bit of extra power, being an 18k swinger on its own, which is nice, and lets you use some energy to control the opponent's board. So this is the kind of the main key cards of the deck. So to help out with the deck for consistency, we want the Avarice Wrestler, which helps us find our Distorted Bane. Since it goes to the order zone as it resolves, since it puts itself in the order zone as it resolves, it dodges the whole bot deck part of the Avarice Wrestler, just how set orders do, making it a great consistency card for it. We also run the Vasargo to be able, the new generic card, to be able to help us find our Anachorus Colossus and our Distorted Banes, because these are such key cards. And then from there, since we don't have a key promo that Japan is running, is pretty much a Shenri clone for Dark States, I chose to test out the Almanac Colossus because while it does cost a counterblast, this deck isn't super counterblast heavy. Just kind of looking through it, yeah, it is not. So it helps you generate card advantage and soul, which is kind of what that Shenri clone does, and it's also a 10k booster, which is nice, and why we can run so many grade 2s and grade 3s and still be fine. And then to round it out, just consistency, just max out on our cyclers, because this deck doesn't need too much soul, and we got ways to generate soul, so Lamina's nice, can also help us build a board if need be. And then the Tizcar is mostly here just for that first, again, just to draw. We've got such key pieces here. We really just want cards that can cycle and help us find those key pieces. And yeah, I'm really curious to see how this deck performs without that promo, because while it isn't like a crazy defining card, it definitely is a really huge step up consistency card. We see how good Shenri has been and stuff. So in English, I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't perform as well, but I do anticipate this to be very popular, and I'm excited to kind of test this deck out myself and see what I think. Greedon's certainly been eating well in the Divine era with yet another support card, this time a double rare in Desire Devil Akuen. So this card's really neat because when placed on Rearguard Circle, as long as your Vanguard's a Greedon or Desire Devil, you can counterblast 1 to check top 5 for a Desire Devil and add it to hand. It's also got a nice bonus effect from Soul. You can Soul Blast and bind it, choose one of your post Rearguards, and put it to Soul. So that was just more of a utility effect if necessary, if it comes up, but really that first skill is the main draw here. So a little extra consistency to find your Desire Devils is something the deck really hasn't had outside of Greedon Masques ability. And well, we'll discuss Greedon Masques in a moment, because this deck is focused around the Avaricious Demonic Dragon Greedon, which does require a bit more input, but does have a higher ceiling than the Greedon Masques. And I actually think this is the better fit for the Akuen, simply because this deck prefers to run more Desire Devils than the Mask version. Rather, the Mask version needs to dedicate more slots to Dragon Tree support and Mask support, and takes away from the Desire Devils, which does hurt the odds of hitting off of the Akuen. Though, neat things about this effect, which I like, are 1, this works on your turn 2, so you can aggress with it if need be. And 2, it can add itself to hand, which is kind of crazy. Like, most cards say you have to choose something other than itself, but you can tag itself, counterblast, check top 5 again, or, you know, even if you don't check top 5 again, it's just finding you another body, which is nice, just gives you more hit targets. So the focus of this deck is just to make a bunch of attacks. We've got the Malsheen, which works way better, I think, in regular Greedon than Mask. Mask has a bit of an awkwardness, which I'll get into. But this deck, because we can make the attack burn of Swing Greedon first, put everything to Soul, Swing Greedon again, then trigger its effect, so we can have it out on board, reset it, and then call it back out again. And that's really, really nice. So really want to find this card. That's why I max it out, just as a good attacker. Doesn't really fuel us doing a double Greedon attack, but that is very seldom based on our triggers. Most of the time, we just want to swarm with a bunch of attacks anyway. And then just a bunch of good stuff. Bolshaku to give our Vanguard more power. Also, we search it off with the ride line. And really, I should talk about the Kuvusji, because the main focus I have around this deck, since we're calling out the Malsheen, it makes a lot of sense to run the Kuvusji here and just get a ton of them to Soul. So when we do start calling stuff out, that they get power plus 5,000 for each. Kuvusji and Soul mean they can get big. So to play into that, of course, we got the Malsheen. We've got the Arakray, which helps during our main phase. We've got the Hiko, which can call itself out during the battle phase to get really big. And those are like the main players. I mentioned the Bolshoku here, which is kind of necessary because the ride line searches out. Also makes our Vanguard big, since it we're not doing mask stuff. Then to round it off, I wasn't too sure how I wanted to, so I ran a 2-2 split of Lamina and the Ford and Revertis. Lamina was more appealing to me just to keep up on card advantage, to have a good discard for ride deck, and then of course once we start Persona riding, it can call stuff out to board as well, meaning that this one card converts to 2, which is very important for Greedon to be able to give us our full board to do our Greedon restance and maximize on our number of attacks. However, I don't want to Soul Blast the Gomon. I'd rather that be the call target with the Aracray to be able to get the guard restrict. And also kind of like keeping the Boshokus in Soul as well, because they make my Greedon bigger, especially on its first attack. So I figured just 2 is fine, because I don't really want to be finding too many of these because I don't want to Soul Blast my stuff out. But I still would like to find 1, so I want to run it. So with the 2 extra slots, I decided let's try the Ford and Revertis, because this functions, it does the important thing of being able to spawn a card out from Soul, such as the Gomon. I mean, we can keep up, this 1 card converts into 2. And it's also got the added benefit of not being restricted behind Persona Ride, which is the other thing I didn't love about Lamina, is sometimes this deck, since we only got 3 copies of Persona Ride, we don't have any dedicated way to search it, we're not always going to be hitting it. So it's nice not to have that restriction. Ford and Revertis just, well, functions, with the added benefit also being to aggress, kind of like the Aquan gives me that dimension. So this is highly theoretical, but I'm super excited to test this, and I kind of feel like really cool about what I cooked up here since I haven't played base Greedon in a long time. While I did say I think base Greedon can use the Aquan a bit more effectively than Mask, I still think it does have a place in the Mask build. So this is why we talked back in the Fated Clash, and this deck doesn't really change all too much from that, just kind of slotting in the Aquan for some extra consistency, and I have a new tech in here with the Servant Falcracia. But since I really haven't talked about this deck past Brilliant Deck List videos, pretty much your goal is just to get into Greedon Masques. The ceiling's a bit lower on this, but the floor is higher. It means a bit just more consistent as long as you can get into Masques than the Greedon. And it also doesn't take up one of your attacks, which is nice, so we can dedicate a bit more to playing into those attacks. So of course we have to run our Dragon Tree package with the 4 Masks, the 4 Skull Chemda, and 3 Mask of Hydrogram. I really like this 4-3 split to make sure we find it, especially as I had a hard draw for that Greedon. It's nice just to make sure we have that consistency. And then of course we want to make sure we can find it, so that I find the Bifrons is just the best card to do that with the top 3 search. Just digs us deeper into our deck with the added benefit of being able to also try to set the Mulchine and Soul, which we do run because it does give us an extra attack main. This can be like a, is that 5 attack deck? Yeah, 5 attack deck. The awkward thing is though, the attack pattern for this deck means that your Greedon likely isn't swinging on turn 1, so you don't get a chance to use the your first battle. I mean, you don't get a chance to reset this into Soul before Greedon swings, and if it's on board, it can't call itself out from Soul or even be in Soul. So that's where it gets a bit awkward, and hence why I'm only running it 3 copies, because it's still an extra attack, but I'm not really dedicating my deck to try to get it off. I'm really just first and foremost trying to set up my masks and do it that way. However, this is where the tech comes in, because with Servant Falcracia, what I can do is if I have a Mulchine on board from a previous turn and I have a Servant access to a Servant Falcracia, I can just overcall the Mulchine and then use Servant Falcracia as the first attack. It gains 15k and can put the Mulchine in Soul and then swing with Vanguard to get the Mulchine out. So just kind of fun little package here I wanted to test out. But other than that, then from there, of course, we've got the Sasio to replace the Bolshoku for that search, and then dedicate the rest of the slots to Arcade, because this is just the best way to help build a board since it tags out for another card. Ideal one. Again, still being the Gomon. And then the final 3 slots, the Aquan. There's enough Desire Devils here between Aracray, Sasio itself, and the Mulchine that I figured I at least want to try it in this deck and see if the hit targets are enough for me to feel comfortable with the understanding that, you know, there might not be enough Desire Devils in here to justify it, in which case either maybe switch off the Servant Falcracia if I really don't like it, or just cut this all together for me like a Ford Revertis to make sure I can help to build a board off of it, is kind of the idea that I'm thinking with this one. Also, there's other options as well, but the Ford Revertis is like the one that stands out to me the most in this build, besides something maybe like a Cycler, because we really need to keep 3 Desire Devils in Soul to be able to use the Greedon Masques, so that knocks out Lamina. And the Tiskar, while it's a good cycle in the early game, it also doesn't, when we need to call down a board and build a board, doesn't really help out because it doesn't plus off of that. But those are just some thoughts I have with this deck. We'll see how it functions. I'm more excited for base Greedon than this one, but still, this little package here does also intrigue me to test, so we're going to try it out. So Direful Dolls have actually received 2 support cards, though only 1 from the set and one's a promo. So the one from the set is the Bartolomea here, and it is a countercharger for the deck, which is nice. So at the middle, this unit boost if you have a Grade 3 or Grade Vanguard Direful Doll in its card name, bind another normal unit rearguard, choose one of your units, and it gets power plus 5,000 till end of turn. If you did not countercharge this turn, put this unit to the bottom of the deck and countercharge 1. So this is a huge technically a minus, but it puts cards where you want them to, so it's, and also generates you countercharge. So you don't mind because of how this deck functions. You call stuff out from bind zone, so that's an inherent plus in and of itself. And of course, you get to call a bunch from soul anyway. So this ends up just being a great utility card, an extra booster, getting countercharge, more power. So yeah, just more Direful Doll names that have good effects. So definitely running more of that. And then the promo, I think, is the real standout one in terms of power plays. That is the Tarquinia. So when this unit it's pretty much a Izasao, but for Direful Dolls. So when it's placed on Rearguard Circle, if you have a Vanguard Direful Doll in its card name, you can counterblast 1 to check top 5 to add a normal unit Direful Doll in its card name from among them to your hand, and you shuffle your deck. That's just a solid effect in general. But on top of that, when it attacks if a Grade 3 or Grade 3 or greater Vanguard Direful Doll in its card name, you may have this unit get 10k until end of that battle. And if you do, you bind it at the end of that battle, which again, you like getting stuff into your bind zone to call out later off of the Android's effect. So, and this one just sets itself up while also being just a massive attacker. This is just the definition of a good card. So we just slot those in against some of the stuff we're using to kind of round out the deck. I was running some cyclers previously, and I know I chipped, oh, and then we're running the Purple Cat from set 11 that countercharged. So since it's on counter charges, we don't need that anymore. We can just slot it out. And from there, the deck still functions exactly how you want it to. You're trying to create multi-attacks with the Providenza. And then we just have good attackers that can tag out to more resources while also setting up for bind zones such as the Liberata. Rezael is a great way to get stuff into Soul. And then, of course, the Pelagria is a great way to put stuff from drop back into Soul. Still running the Schwarzspada because this helps us get the Direful Doll either heal or crit into Soul, or get... Sorry, not into Soul, but from our Soul into our bind zone to just have some massive shield value plays. And it also gives itself 10k, making it a good booster. I still think it's a worthy inclusion, despite it not being a Direful Doll name. So we'll just kind of keep messing around. These decks are interesting to me because it encourages you to run specific named cards, in this case, Direful Doll. So you want to run the specific Direful Doll support, but then it hinges on those Direful Doll cards being the exact cards you want. So we'll see how it goes in my play testing to see if I want to adjust some of these ratios for some other cards that are outside the Direful name to round it out, or maybe if I want to try to slot in some more Direful Dolls. But I don't expect it. This has been such a great card. Like, it never felt like a bad card, but we'll see. Finally, for Dark States, we're going to talk about Luquier here, because I think the Fasargo here is an interesting utility card for this deck, because this deck really likes to accumulate its pieces, and that can be the biggest struggle a lot of times when piloting it, is what you find and when. So just having the ability to kind of ditch some of your main or your ride deck stuff to find a Showered Applause Dragon or OG Luquier to set up in Soul, so you can focus on finding other pieces with your Togue, or just putting the getting the hurry and join loyal servants card. I think it's just extra consistency to the deck. And while I could see it being a bit annoying, especially early on when you haven't built too much of a Soul, to be able to get rid of cards that you could call out with the Luquier's effects, such as the Irina and the Undella, because sometimes you call it out. My thought process is, if I can find Showered Applause Dragon and call it out, I'm getting more cards into Soul anyway. So I wanted to try out to see how it feels, fully understanding that it might just not be worth it just to lose those cards out on Soul, because then I'm not able to call as much from Soul to board. But that is what testing is for. And what I cut for this card is I got rid of the Bolshoku. As cool of a concept it is to be able to get a 5 attack with Bolshoku, it just felt like kind of a win more combo for what this deck was already doing. So I decided to cut it for other stuff. And I also added back in the Breathing Dragon, because this lets the get more power for the attacks I do have by being able to call it Soul, to give the Vanguard the ability that your friend gets power plus 5,000. So that sounded really appealing to me, just more ways to push out more power than necessarily get another attack. And to get, figured 3 copies felt pretty good, just to be able to find it, because the 4 color was really just an addition that kind of felt a bit awkward. It worked, but And since we got the Fasargo for some extra consistency, I figured, 2 copies, why not? So those are kind of the adjustments I made. We'll see how it feels. I'm not 100% convinced about it, but as I said, that's what testing's for. And yeah, we'll see what conclusion I come to. If you've been enjoying this video, please consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you're notified when I do upload more content. With that out of the way, let's get back into these deck lists. Moving over to Brandgate, I want to start with Rotovisor. Despite Impauldio getting support and that kind of being the more notable deck, I'm sorry, the support card for Rotovisor is way better than the support card is for Impauldio. So we got Trabant Rotovisor, and first off, I want to point out this is a grade 3 with Rotovisor, which is huge because Wassair Rotovisor now has another target that it can add to hand me with less, and I'm so happy because that was a frustrating point for the deck. But what this card does is it's got an act once per turn skill to Energy Blast 3. Choose your Vanguard with Rotovisor and its card name until end of turn. That unit's original auto ability's cost becomes Counterblast 1. So we get to discount it, making it even easier to use, which is really nice, and converting energy into essentially a counter charge, but a better counter charge is a nice thing for this deck to have. But then, with that extra Counterblast, this does do something, but when it stands by your grade 3 or greater Vanguards with Rotovisor's ability, you can Soul Blast 1, choose any number of arenas in your order zone, stand at them. If you stood 3 or more arenas by this effect, Counterblast 1 and all your front row get power plus 10,000. So I really like the Soul Blast. Like, this deck has excess soul, that's not a problem. But I really like the ability to Soul Blast to be able to stand your arenas, meaning now on your second slew of attacks, your opponent either has to guard all of them to prevent you from generating more resources and recouping them, or they have to just take some and you get those resources, which just feels great because that's one of the main things your opponent could do is play around this deck is by denying the attacks that were bolstered by the order card. And this card just says, yeah, you can't do that. And then on top of that, once you accept those 3 or more, you're more likely to be able to kill with it, which is what this deck was trying to do to begin with and how I built this deck. So just having even more oomph to those attacks, phenomenal, especially after opponent starts checking defensive triggers if they take some early damage. I absolutely love this card for the deck. 2 solid effects, and the fact that's a grade 3 with Rotovisor in its card name. Now, the rest of the deck functions exactly how it was. I did add in the Union of the Sky because that's just a nice order, another way to use some energy to be able to dig for more pieces. But other than that, the only thing I really cut was the flex cards, which was the Bulba Mine, but we've got a pseudo counter charge in the Trabant Rotovisor here, both through its first effect and the fact that it can reset those orders in your order zone. And then the Blitz order I also cut because, well, Union of the Sky was there, and I needed some extra slots, and those, again, were flex slots, while everything else was a bit more dedicated. You also notice that I cut the Combine Rusher, that's what it's called, and that's just because the idea was it helped me build a front row, but now I have plenty of cards I like in the front row. We've got of course, the new Trabant. We, of course, usually want the Compassionate mechanic, so I figured, since I know I want those 2, I really don't need the Combine Rusher anymore. And granted, it does get me rid of a way to plus off of that, but the Counterblast I think is just a bit more utilized here. And we've got extra consistency to find it in the form of the Glitch Opocenter. So that's the generic, can help us find we got plenty of targets here, Elbard X Striker and the Trabant Rotovisor. So I figured this is just a really nice consistency card as well to get the strategy set up. And, well, Rotovisor seemed the least appealing because really I can cover what Rotovisor covered in other ways, and the other cards don't quite do that. Now, final thing I want to discuss is, you notice I am not running the new set order. It's because I'm not a big fan of it. Having an on-hit draw, to me, how I looked at it was I've got plenty of ways to draw in this deck already and consistently find cards. I mean, Compassion Mechanic is a perfect example here with his Energy Blast 3 to draw a card. So the thought process is, and it costs Energy Blast 3. That's the other thing that frustrated me. So my thought is, do I really want to hold the energy, the resources, in hopes I hit to draw a card? Or would I rather pressure by gaining back those resources with effects on board that can guarantee draw me a card as long as I have those resources? And the latter is just way more appealing to me. And I think it also is a bit more awkward for the opponent to decide, because it's like, oh, you're going to draw a card? Yeah, I block it. Versus this one, you're not converting it to immediate resources, so your opponent kind of has to really think a bit more whether or not they want that to hit or not. And I kind of like that mind game as well, because it also can punish players who don't properly navigate that as well. So overall, I just think the resource gain is a bit better, especially since we're adding another card that uses energy, Soul Blast, Counter Blast as well. Yeah, much more preferred. So I'm really excited to test out this deck, because as much as it is definitely not an amazing deck, it's one that I've grown a personal attachment to after cooking for so long with it, that I'm excited to finally see it get such a great support card. I so hope it gets even more great support in the future. So maybe it can be even better. Maybe it can be a rogue pick at some point. I don't know. The counterboss is hard to swallow, but still, I can hope. As I mentioned, Impauldio did get a support card in the Headway Router Dragon. So this one isn't, I said it wasn't as exciting as the Rotovisor support card, and part of that is personal bias because I love Rotovisor. But I also think from an objective standpoint, this card doesn't really do what the deck needed, but it's still not a bad support card, so I still want to run it. So what it does is when it's placed on Rearguard Circle, as long as you got an auto mod gauge, you can Energy Blast 3 to check top 5, choose a card with a different name from this unit and grade less than equal to your Vanguard from among them, call it to Rearguard Circle, and shuffle your deck. More ways to thin the deck, more ways to build a board, and it's on a grade 1 body, which this deck felt like it's kind of lacking in terms of grade 1s. Like, you know, you got some good grade 2s to call out and whatnot, but not as many great boosters, and the boosters you do have kind of put themselves into soul, which can kind of hurt numbers sometimes. And then its secondary ability is just when it boosts, if you have 5 more Autobot gauge, Soul Blast 1, and this unit gets 5,000 until end of that battle. This just hits a bit too late. Like, it would be really nice if it just was Soul Blast 1, gain 5k when it attacks or boosts, because then I slotted it over the Panerai Dragon. We'll see if that ends up being a mistake, but I always felt like the worst card in the deck and really was just there because it was an early game Soul Blast, at least let you dig for pieces. But man, I wish it did that, because 5 or more auto mod gauge, you already kind of set up with power. You don't really need more. But at the same time, this deck has so much excess soul, and extra 5k will take it. So still just a way to deck thin to be able to hit more triggers. So I definitely think it's worth it. And as I said, I replaced it with the Panerai Dragon because I really didn't like that card, and the deck felt like sort of a necessary evil. But other than that, this deck remained exactly the same and functions exactly the same way. We're just trying to build up the auto mod gauge, then the deck out with Impauldio, go for a big multi-drive check turn between Impauldio's Divine Scale and the Vinster as well. And then we just got great ways to continue thinning the deck, get a bunch of shield value to be able to tank out, even more scaling power with Impauldio. And yeah, that's about it. Impauldio is going to do what Impauldio does, so I'm still excited to continue testing it because I do enjoy the deck. Moving right along to Keter Sanctuary, we've got the upgrade of Rezael, Fated King of Miracles, Rezael Vita. So this card is an upgrade to Rezael, similar to how Rakshasa is for Varga, and is a strict upgrade, but instead of it improving upon what Rezael does, it really just gives it extra effects to capitalize off of. For instance, its first effect lets it be treated as Fated One of Miracles Rezael, so for Persona Ride purposes, that's nice, but also gets 5k for each Fated One of Miracles Rezael in your soul, and it gets all of its divine skills. So that's how it gets a divine skill here. And that power is quite nice because that's one thing Rezael always lacked was power, and now this one helps give your Vanguard power. Now for its second effect, it's pretty much what Rezael's original effect was, but with an addition on top of it, because now you can put a grade 3 with Rezael and its card name for your hand into soul to call a grade 3 or less card from your drop zone to rearguard circle, and as long as their opponent's Vanguard's grade 3 or greater, all units called by this effect get power plus 5,000 till end of turn. So more power, and now you can call 3 instead of 2, which is super appealing, while also getting a Rezael and soul to bolster this guy. So I have seen some builds run this guy in the ride deck as well. I saw more builds running it not in the ride deck. I'm not quite sure, 100% sure on the reason why. I think the logic is that you're not really capitalizing too much on what this guy gains and enhances itself with from the OG Rezael, so why not just guarantee get one of his soul on your turn 4 while also having now 4 Persona Ride copies in deck. I guess technically 7 because we're running old Rezael, but really you're wanting to ride this one on turn 4 and start shoving these into soul to give this more power. But that's my guess on it. I'll see how I feel and see if I want to switch it around because I really want to capitalize on what this does uniquely. But again, testing will tell. The other new card we get is another new payoff card, Blessed Dragon Gabuelius. This is a really cool card for a Soul Blast 1 place. You get to check the top card and put it on top or bottom. If you put it on bottom, gains 5k. And then when it attacks, as long as you got 4 more cards in your damage zone, it gets 5k until end of that turn. And if this was, until end of that battle, and if this was placed on Rearguard Circle by the ability of your Fated One, and no drive checks were performed the battle your rearguard attack this turn, you can counterblast 1 to give it 10k and drive -1 instead, and it performs drive checks. So this is pretty much just an extra drive check on your rearguard, meaning you can get 3 drive checks and 4 drive checks if you're on a divine skill turn. And clearly this is the card you want to call off of the shove a Rezael to soul to call an extra grade 3 or less card. So that's pretty good stack, especially in the late game when you've been able to divine skill and compress your deck to get a bunch of critical triggers. Seems pretty strong, but of course, since this is a late game card, we don't need more than probably the 2 copies. But the rest of the deck is really has been focused and condensed more around just filtering your deck, getting pieces so you can find specific cards, set up your drop zone to be able to utilize off of Rezael's effect, and eventually just be able to beat down your opponent with a slew of critical triggers from a bunch of drive checks. So to accomplish that, the best ones to do that are the Nilberis, which also helps you stack top card, gain some power, Cadwalla, which is great in the early game and can help you find specific pieces. Saragon, we'll go over the new piece last. Saragon, now we're not running many orders, but we're building a big board, so it's pretty easy to get this guy off. We have cut the order packaged for this condensation. Also makes sense since now we're having to run 3 regular Rezael and 4 the new one to get off its effect. And then the Param, just as a nice way to continue to dig through your deck. That's also a 13k booster. Some decks I saw run this, others not. I decided I have the 4 copies. I kind of want to test to see what I think. Is this good enough, or is there another piece that is more appealing to me? We'll see in testing. Still, of course, the Aerial Sage for some resources, and then the other splash I saw that I kind of liked was 1 copy of each Maple, just because it helps us set up a free column, which is even less burden on your hand. And then while they don't tag themselves out, you're perfectly fine overcalling them if need be anyway, because they will just reset themselves next turn anyway, as long as you re-ride. So interesting upgrade for this deck, and I'm excited to play it and see what I think. I think Theagra is another deck that can take advantage of these cycler cards, and honestly to a higher degree, because we're almost always going to be on either Dark Theagra and Light Theagra at some interval during our main phase, so we can use this card to specifically search out the Persona Ride copies. However, only 1 copy, because how this deck plays, we want to keep the 1 Light Theagra in Soul, so we only ever have 2 cards to be able to use its effect for. So based on previous iterations of Theagra, I really wasn't happy with how they were functioning and performing, so I decided to go back to the drawing board with this one. So this is kind of what I cooked up. It's still centered around a P2 Theagra, be able to do double Persona Ride and easily get access to some deck thinning of our Dark Theagra and easily be able to cycle between the 2 so we can condense copies of these, so much so that we're not even running Light Theagra in deck anymore. We just keep the 1 from our Ride deck in our Soul or on Vanguard Circle. And then benefiting from our enhanced Persona Ride with the Oath of Vengeance Theagra, meaning we're get plus 3k in Persona Ride and a potential to draw 4 cards just between those 2 Persona Rides. Scary because it does lead us to deck out, but the power is too good just to beat down the opponent. To help with the consistency, of course, I mentioned the Cycler, which is really nice to find Persona Ride copies. We also have the Mayrig here as a backup, but also lets us accelerate our game plan when we go second by a turn, so we can start doing stuff on turn 3. Granted, it's only with 1 Persona Ride, but that's better than what we do if we went first, where we're just sitting on Light Theagra, just thinning the deck and doing 3 attacks. So really, this is a going second deck. So 3 Mayrig may seem like an odd choice, since we really are wanting to utilize that. And it also can function as a decent backup in the event we don't have a Persona Ride copy. We can now use this to be able to search that P2 just as Theagra. We lose out on a Persona Ride, but we still get the deck to function as we want it to. I chose to run 3, mostly because I think we got plenty of ways to dig for this card and to find it. So I figured let's just try it out at 3 so I have more slots for other stuff. Easily bump it up in testing if I find that I'm missing it when trying to execute this game plan. So from there, though, that's kind of the core of the deck, and I really was just running a bunch of good stuff to be able to do that. If you note 1/1 split of Maple, these cards are nice because free calls to the board are very great. This deck doesn't have a problem with building a board though, so they're not super necessary. I think the pink Moth Girl Maple is a real shining point here because it's a restander, meaning that when we restand either our Dark Theagra or restand Regard with Light Theagra, this restands with it, making it just a massive column. However, once we find 1 copy of each of these, that's all we need. We don't need additional copies, so I don't feel like dedicating cards in deck that are just going to be dead after the first copy when I can run a bunch of other cards to help me actually find these 1-ofs. So that's kind of the logic I was using there. Unfortunately, I think at least this Maple's really fallen off in terms of usefulness. But getting back to what the deck is also doing, for those digging, of course, we got Light Theagra's effect. We got Liael Valtrosa, which can also help try to curb the deck out issue this deck has. Saragon, which kind of seems counter to that because it is deck out. But this is just such a phenomenal tool in the early game. It's a really great grade 1 to have access to start digging for pieces and aggressing. So I think it's worth the risk. Really, this deck's just trying to win ASAP. And then to round off the deck, the new generics I was trying out were centered around the fact that this deck discards at a ton of intervals. We've got discard from just Ride deck, we've got discard from a P2 Justice Theagra, both Light and Dark Theagra discard for their effects to get additional attacks. So I think Baradiarch is a very interesting card for this deck, as now we can loop back those cards with its secondary effect, and its first effect, since we're also trying to go second, gets a lot of utility for us to be able to kind of start filtering triggers to the top to aggress that way, and some extra power is also nice. And the final card is the Exalted Dragon. I thought this was a really interesting card. since it gets to call itself out when it is discarded, meaning it can always recall itself as a booster behind whatever is restanding and attacking again, and it should always have boost on account of the fact that we are placing a Vanguard by a card's ability always with a Pidu Justice Theagra, which we should always be going into. So yeah, that's that. Just a 10k booster that will always be live as long as the deck's functioning as I intend it to. And also, this is just a nice piece for some also early game aggression on a grade 2 discard as well, but I didn't really play into it too much. So that's the 3 copies, as we only have so much soul in this deck as well. When we get to a certain point in the game where pretty much we're fine soul blasting our grade 0 through 2, but we always want to keep this grade 3 in there. So that's max 3 uses anyway. Hence why I decided to only run it at 3 copies. If you note, the ride line is just the set 13 Alden ride line of the Tranquilia and Suodios. And that's just because grade 1 Theagra, and I really do want effects that can help me progress my game state, maybe be a bit more aggressive. That's also why I chose not to run the Pink Moth Girl Maple in the ride line. Despite having a way to soul blast it out, I just don't think it's consistent enough and good enough to play into. And then the Suodios over the Harsh Training Theagra. This is because I was looking at the called targets, or the hit targets for Harsh Training Theagra, and since we're only running one of each Maple, it's not much. It really is not. So I don't think it's worth it. I think I'll be whiffing it more often than hitting it. So I'd rather just get a deck then and plus to board. And plus we've got a great spread of grades to be able to hit off of that card's ability. So I feel pretty good about that one. But that's the theory of this. We'll see how good it actually is, or if it's still just going to be this deck just doesn't have enough oomph and decks itself out. Moving over to the last nation we'll cover. No, we're not covering Lyrical, but we are covering Stoicheia because I love Stoicheia stuff. And we've got the Destined King of Infinity, Levidras Empireo, or Empireo. So this card functions very similarly to Rezael Vita, where this is just kind of does what the original Levidras did, the Destined one of Infinity Levidras did, but even better. So it gets power on itself with its same skill, just it treats out Levidras for Persona Ride purposes, but then gains 5k for each Levidras in your soul and all their divine skills. So same exact function, just a bigger Vanguard swing, which is much, much appreciated. It still has that same skill with the Infinity Dice markers to give something plus or minus, and if you give it minus, remove it and draw a card. But the key here is that act skill. This is just a better version of Levidras's act skill, so you can counterblast one or put a card from hand into soul. That's pretty huge, just any card into soul, and so you don't have to pay a counterblast. But by doing so, you get to choose 2 of any player's rearguard circles and put an Infinity Dice marker on each of them, and if you put a grade 3 card with Levidras in its card name, choose 3 instead of 2. So of course, getting 3 Infinity Dice markers means you're accelerating those even quicker than the original Levidras did. So you can start utilizing more of your skills as soon as the first grade 3 turn. But also note it doesn't specify which player's rearguard circles, meaning you right away can just throw 2 Infinity Dice markers on your opponent's front row rearguard circles, and now you're just really hampering their offense. That's just makes so much more flexible, so much more potent, and that is the main reason why we're running this in the ride deck. For that effect right there, it's just way better, and we just want to throw in Levidras in right away. Just throw those 2 in the front row, 1 for your rearguard circles, and you're sitting golden. Otherwise, this deck, it still functions very similarly, just enhanced, not only because of that Levidras skill, but because of a lot of the new support cards that it got this set. So we'll go over the next one here, the Charmnet. This card can call itself from Drop Zone if you have 3 or more Infinity Dice markers, and you don't have to regard the same name as this unit for a Soul Blast, so we set up 3 right away. More reason to run this in our ride deck. And then when this unit attacks, if your Infinity Dice marker is in the same column as this unit, so it just can be on any player's rearguard circle, you can retire another rearguard, get 10k, and at the end of battle, you retire this unit and draw a card. So you're getting cards off the board, more cards in hand to dig for more pieces, and even more power. That's great. And we've got a bunch of on-play effects, which really like to be kind of reset with this card and then called out later. The other new card from this is the Inquisitive Squirrel. So at the end of battle, this unit boosted Soul Blast 1 and move this to an open back row rearguard circle. If you move to a rearguard circle with an Infinity Dice marker, stand this card and gets 5k power. So this is just a really, really powerful effect to have, because in one, this can just be a big booster after it tagged out from being another booster, or after it tagged out from being a booster. But on top of that, with the ability to give it the ability to attack with the Foxhole, it can act as like just a massive booster that then tags out into a massive attacker as well, just further extending what this deck is trying to do, which is phenomenal. But other than those new cards, this deck is still trying to accomplish all the things that Levidras was previously doing. Again, just way better with way better support cards. So we still got the Notagaster to get another back row attacker, and the energy velocity effect is just really good. Huli is a great way to be able to recall those pieces, since we, of course, are retiring with the Charm Net. We also got Varga in this meta, so being able to call back stuff is great. And then, of course, we got our Foxel for additional attacks as well. If you notice, it's at 3 Kais, the Squirrel's just too good. Because even if we don't use the Foxel's effect on it, it can still tag itself to be a big booster for an opposite column, which also means we don't need to dedicate as many pieces to board to technically get still some potent attacks, which is really nice. But of course, extra attack still really great with the Foxel. The final card here that we're running is the Aspronia and Saphira. So this card is really great for the early game, and also just to be able to recall pieces to build boards, but especially for the early game, as it lets us try to filter through our deck to get more pieces into drop, which this deck is great at calling them out. And then on top of that, it can just call out a grade 2 or greater card from drop on turn 2, so you can get your Charm Net in cycle right away, which I think is a really cool effect to have. Though it can reset itself, it's not the biggest deal, but still 13k attacker right away, especially if you end up going first. That's still a 10k guard. That's good. So, and then of course in late game you just tag it out to really anything but these Foxels and Squirrels. But even be able to go Saphira into Huli into one of these two, that seems pretty good. Bring out your Anatagaster to search. Like, this deck just now has all the kind of connective pieces to really make it seem like it's going to flow quite nicely into its game plan overall. I think the biggest thing will just be trying to find these Persona rides, since of course we're running the 1, we still only have 3 in deck. We can ride into the OG Levidras, but obviously that's just not as good as this one. We want to stick on this one. So I'm really excited to test out this deck. This was the main reason I decided to pick it up last set, not because that set Levidras really intrigued me. It was this one and all the new support cards that I think will make this just a really fun and easy flowing, or I should say easy flowing, but just a coherent deck. The Veleno deck also got a triple row support card in the Lefonfila. I'm not going to try, but pretty much this one's just a better version of the Fiore from a rare from Divine Set 1. As for the same cost, same condition, you get to check top 7 instead of top 5 for up to 1 card with Veleno, or up to 1 order card without Regalis piece from on the real put in hand and shuffle your deck. This is opposed to this one, which again requires a Lascaria still, counterblast 1, but you only get to check top 5 for a Veleno or 1 Blitz order. So this one can search out any order. The only difference is this one can search out your Blitz order Regalis pieces. This one cannot search out any Regalis pieces. And then on top of that, as long as you have 3 more Velenos, it gets 5k, as opposed to this one just getting the 2k if you have a Lascaria Vanguard. So a bit easier to achieve, but less power. So is this the most interesting support card for the deck? Nah, not really, but it's certainly good. So really what I focus this deck in on is just the fact that we've got 2 cards that really help us thin our deck and find our pieces. So we're dedicating early game to using these cards to build up our board, find our pieces, and then from there, we just kind of try to sustain with, of course, a lot of our Blitz orders to be able to start countercharging, generating more card advantage, to ultimately build up to a play where we can use the Orfist for some extra attack in combination with the Nectar Sensationalism, making it really big and gaining extra criticals for both swings. Since this deck, there's Varga in this meta, and this deck really wants to keep its board and also burns the resources without having necessarily the best way to recoup them. Like, we can recover 1 counter charge, but this deck counter lasts so much that I don't think that's enough. We do run the Bracing Angel Ladder to be able to protect the board for a turn, and on top of that, an extra draw on some soul is nice as well. But yeah, other than that, just a good Veleno pieces. Grudoli, since we cut our Soul Blast orders, we have at least usually 2 uses. We can get up to 3 uses, but I think 2 uses, and this is just a 15k attacker or booster. Of course, we've got our Sidaraka to be able to loop back our Blitz orders whenever we need them to. And then the Melia, another way to help loop back some cards to start gaining some more advantage, since this deck mostly thins from decks, but having access to Drop Zone to be able to start digging off of the new card or the Fiore, that also seems nice. This deck I'm not quite sure about, because of course we want to run the Veleno names, meaning we're stuck in the Veleno archetype, but I really feel like this deck is missing some substantial counter charge, since a lot of stuff needs to counterblast. Orfist, Soraka, and now the new one, and Fiore. It just seems like a bit of a mess. So I'm not quite confident on this deck, but I was looking through generic counterblast or countercharge pieces, and there really isn't too many. So that I think will be good for this deck. So I'm not too confident about this deck. I feel like it's still missing something, but I'm still going to try it. And I feel like a lot of these other pieces just kind of feel a bit odd. Like, this one just doesn't, at least on paper, doesn't feel that great, but feels like a necessary card to run the deck based on what we already have. We'll see. I think at the end of the day, I'm still excited to test it because I think this deck is really neat, but I think unfortunately this card's just not interesting whatsoever. It's good, it's just redundant, and really the deck needs more diverse pieces than more of just the same thing, but we'll see. The last deck I'm going to cover that got direct support in the set is Flagburg, with an amazing card here, the Giant Sea Dragon, Boat Pelagic Dragon. So in place on rear guard circle from hand, you may counter soul charge 1. Just generate some extra resources, okay, but it's completely optional, which I really like. Really, the draw is that second effect, that auto rear guard circle once per turn. At the end of battle, this unit attacked a Vanguard. If it was the first or second battle this turn, and you have a grade 3 or greater, stand Vanguard with Flagburg its card name. You can Counter Blast 1 or Energy Blast 3, stand this unit, and it gets power plus 10,000 till end of that battle. This is just the best restander in the deck. It's flexible both when it triggers, what resources you use to do it, and it gains power. This is phenomenal. I think the only knock is it's a grade 3, which in terms of offense isn't a knock because it means it makes good numbers, but rather it's just another card with not that much shield value, which this deck has a ton of. But yeah, this card's great. So pretty much Flagburg just doing what Flagburg does, using its best pieces to be able to get up to that 5 attack threshold, and even past that, to then be able to, you know, draw a card, retire to your opponent's rear guards, and then give this one power, and your opponent has to call 3 or more from hand to guard circle at the same time for at least, for that battle, which is a huge threatening swing. So pretty much this deck is just centered around, we want to get this guy. We also want to find our inlet pulses to be able to draw more cards, and it's also just a phenomenal attacker for a Soul Blast. And then also once our opponent's at grade 3, which I mean both these inlet pulse needs to be at grade 3, but it's fine finding on your first grade 3 turn going first before your opponent's at grade 3 because it draws you a card. But the Shelling Cannon Dragon also once our opponent's at grade 3, it's just a back row attacker for big numbers. We also want that. That's our goal. If we're going first, which this deck does like to do, we do have the Tyranite RX to act as our multi-attack extender. Not as great as the grade 3s, but it is what we need for our first grade 3 turn going first. This card deck also highly benefits from the Sound Surging Brave Shooter to be able to help us find out our key grade 3 attack extenders. Obviously can't search out Persona Ride, but that's fine. And we have plenty of ways to generate soul, so we're fine getting rid of these cards preemptively if we find it early. And then from there, just to round out, I just ran a bunch of consistency pieces. We've got the Sea Rumble Brave Shooter, since we got flexible energy and counterblast usage with the new card, our, what is it called? Boat Pelagic Dragon. This fits in nicely with the same. We can kind of alternate between what resources we use for these two. So just good ride deck discard, dig for more pieces. Good guard card to dig for more pieces as well. We run the Mythiarch Habitat to be able to find those pieces. Really, this is to be used on your grade 3 turn, so we're not really using it too early, but that's fine. Forbidal, also great to be able to search out those key grade 3 pieces. And then at some point, we really don't need to dig through our deck anymore. We just kind of want to recall key cards from our drop and give them power. So Spiritual Body Condensation to do that. I'm not entirely convinced this is the best way to develop the non-engine, but is the best of the best, so we're going to try it out and see how it goes. We also run the Zorga, Ranker Chain Ryline, and Black Dragon, just because we're running so many orders, and it's just better than the Flagburg ride line, in my opinion. So that's kind of what we're rocking with here. I do think that the core is really strong, but we do need a bit more better support to be able to find it. Like, I don't love Mythiarch Habitat and not running all these orders, especially since we don't really want to use them until we get to our grade 3. But I guess Mythiarch and Mythiarch isn't too bad. So we'll see. I'm going to test it as is. I don't expect this deck to be amazing, but this is still a really good support card. And I think this deck does have the potential to at least be kind of super fun and will be able to accomplish what it wants to accomplish, even if it isn't enough to win. Moving into our second to last deck here. I know it's been a long one, almost there. We're just focusing on the decks that I think get enhanced by the generic card. And I think Magnolia Elder does that. It's another way to help search out our Magnolia Elder, and we also like to run the Inlet Pulse for draw and the Ilargolv as well. So I know I was kind of off the Inlet Pulse Dragon back during set 1 when I was testing it, but I really want to try it out again, and we've got easier ways to consistently hit this card and not have to lean as much into the orders as well. So for this deck, the idea is we want to get up to Magnolia Elder. We run the 2 Friendship Fairy for if we're going second to get up in a turn sooner, but really we want to go first, and I don't think this card is that great, but also this deck definitely doesn't want to sit on Magnolia for a turn if my opponent's already on grade 3. So we're running 2 of, hopefully we can find it when we are going second. And then from there, of course, for Inlet Pulse, because that's our best way to generate resources, and Largolv is just a phenomenal shield that also can be a great discard and can help add back piece if we need to help build a board. We use the new Sound of Surging Brave shooter to be able to help find those pieces, and a Magnolia Elder if we're still on OG Magnolia. And then from there, just good cards. Bonus Body is just great at building a board. We got Goyledote here, which is a great attacker from the back row. Only 2 copies because I'm using this ideology that, you know, we only ever get to really utilize one for its full effect. It's a nice attacker, but we got plenty of those in this deck. So really, we just want to run 2 copies to hopefully be able to find the 1 and tag it out. Sometimes 2 can be beneficial, though, if we want to call something out to Soul with Magnolia's effect, so we can shove 1 to Soul and then call another one out. So there's reason to run 2, but I don't see much more than the 2 copies. Also trying the Aspronia and Saphira here, just for its ability, meaning we can discard an Inlet Pulse early, and then on turn 2, call this down, start aggressing. And it's just another way to help build a board quite effectively. Not the best power, but for power, we are also running the Maerasi. I'm dedicating a bit more into this as the big power play of the deck, which can help bolster the numbers quite a bit, while also being a solid attacker by itself. So yeah, that's the new focus of this deck, just kind of leaning a bit more into Maerasi and the Inlet Pulse stuff than previously. Still running the new Ride line because I think it's quite solid for the deck, and we'll see how this functions. And finally, we got Maelstrom here, which I think also gets bolstered by the Sound of Surging Brave shooter, because it specifically helps us search out our Inlet Pulse Dragons and the second copy of the Order here. This might be a bit of like hopeful thinking, because I don't think this like revolutionizes Maelstrom whatsoever, but I do want to see if this helps out a bit just to make sure I can find my pieces. I can also find Grail. That's another call target. And while this deck does like its soul, it doesn't absolutely need, especially like with the idea being if we haven't used our soul, but we use the generic to find our Inlet Pulse Dragons, we're getting that soul back anyway, especially if we can find multiple copies. So this, if you watch the deck profile I did back during set 3, this deck functions exactly the same as it does before. Building up to our turn 3, we want to find our Inlet Pulse Dragons, get that to soul. Then once we hit our turn 4 Persona Ride, while we do want to hit some of these pieces before then, such as our Tidal Assault for multi-attack, really what we want to set up is call Inlet Pulse off of our Maelstrom's effect, so it gets the restand effect, have a Tidal Assault, as well as a Wheel Assault and a Flow Strike Brave Shooter, bolstered by a Tideline Dragon to just be able to create a bunch of attacks with some extra power between restanding, swapping, between and that Flow Strike and Wheel Assault to do. And then, of course, this is just our best attacker to bolster our attacks, give the power to one of our restanders. We're getting double bonuses off of that. Still only on the 2 Storm of Judgment, because this deck I don't think can last long enough to warrant running multiple copies, because ideally we want to be playing them turn after turn after turn. Really, we just want to find our one, place it, and that's how we're going about it. And we're just trying to win ASAP. And then rounding it off, Sea Realm Brave Shooter is just a good card to delve dig for more resources. Nothing too much more to say about it here, but I'm hoping that this card at least makes it feel a bit better. I'm hoping it's good, but we'll see. And that is it for this extensive deck preliminary deck list video, a whole bunch of stuff that I talked about here. But I've done enough talking. Now I want to pass it on to you all. What are you excited to play from this set, and kind of what stuff are you trying out in there? I'm really excited to hear down in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you're notified when I do upload more content. But with all that being said though, look forward to more content coming out real soon.